This happened back in 2008. I wasn't planning on going to that party. It was one of those friend of a friend setups. The kind where you're already half convinced it'll be awkward before you even get there. My buddy Ryan had vouched for it though. He said it'd be fun and worth my time. Then, about 10 minutes before I got there, he bailed. Sent me a quick text that said, "Something came up, can't make it." By then, I was already pulling into the neighborhood, headlights bouncing off rows of identical houses built in the early 2000s, the kind with fresh sod and half-grown trees. Every driveway filled with cheap sedans and SUVs. Still, I figured, screw it, I'm already here. The place was packed. Music thumped through the walls, and the air smelled like that mix of cheap beer, cigarette smoke, and whatever cologne some guy had poured too much of on his shirt. I did the usual thing, nursed a beer, hung by the kitchen, and pretended like I knew somebody. Eventually, I drifted into the living room where people were sitting cross-legged on the carpet, shouting over each other about nothing. That's where I met her. She slipped into the circle like she already belonged, sat close enough that her knees almost brushed. She had dark hair, sharp eyes, and that kind of smile people know they have and know how to use. Next to her was a guy, tall, a little too lean, with the same eyes and that same sharp smile. She said he was a friend, but the way they hovered near each other told me different. I know how friends act. They might diss each other or be a little playful, but you can tell there's nothing physically there. What I saw wasn't that. It was the way his hand lingered near her arm, the way she leaned into him, the way their laughter fell in sync, like an inside joke that had gone on for years. It felt more like they were close in a way that made me want to keep some distance. But she had a way of pulling me in. We talked for what felt like hours, about nothing important. Music, places we'd been, half-formed plans for the summer. All the while, he sat nearby, always watching. Not saying much, but just listening, and nodding when she did, like they were mirrors of each other. I chalked it up to bad vibes. Some people are just strange. But later in the night, something started to feel more than that. I'd only had 2 beers, maybe 3 tops. I was pacing myself, because I didn't know anyone well enough to get sloppy. But my head started swimming like I'd been pounding shots. My knees were jelly, and even standing felt like trying to balance on a hoverboard. She noticed before I said anything, gave me this little smile and said, almost too sweetly, that maybe I'd had too much to drink, that she and her friend could drive me home. Her friend looked way too eager. His grin was quick, like he'd been waiting for her to say those exact words. Every alarm in my head went off at once. I didn't know why, but the idea of being in a car with those two felt like walking into a trap. Still, I was dizzy, and she was already helping me up, her arm looped through mine like we'd known each other for years. I wanted to stop, to run away, but my legs wouldn't listen, and I wasn't even strong enough to fight her gentle dragging. I was halfway down the front steps when someone stopped me. I don't remember who it was, just a blur of movement, a firm hand on my shoulder, a voice saying not a good idea. Then an argument started, sharp words between that stranger and the other two. I remember the girl's face tightening, her smile gone brittle. The guy friend, if that's what he really was, stepping forward like he might shove someone. But whoever had stepped in didn't back down. I don't remember the details, only the tension in the air, the way the music inside seemed far away while the night stretched thin around us. Then they were gone. I woke up the next morning in my own bed. My mouth was dry, my head heavy with a hangover that didn't belong to 2 or 3 beers. There was a dull ache in my stomach and my memory was patchy. like pieces had been scraped away. I knew without a doubt I'd been drugged. Ryan showed up later that afternoon, sheepish for bailing on me. He apologized, said if he'd known the twins were going to be there, he wouldn't have even suggested the party. The twins, I asked? The girl, her brother, they were twins. That's when he told me they had a reputation. They were always together, and the way they acted around each other was too nice. If you catch my meaning, he said. Rumors followed them, of course, about the kind of things they'd done, both separate and together. Usually they would target people at parties that weren't in their main friend group, but stories would always make their way back to the others. Sometimes it was just reports of theft. Other times it was much worse. They'd been caught at other parties leading people outside and away. Some people even said that after a night partying with them, they would feel terrible the next day in ways that didn't make sense. No one could prove anything, though. Ryan told me that the host assured him they wouldn't be there, but maybe with so many people at that party, no one noticed them until they were leading me away. All I know is I don't remember who pulled me away that night. I don't remember how I got home, but I'm grateful someone was watching out for me, because I was seconds away from stepping into a car with people who, at best, wanted to take advantage of me. And at worst, well, I don't think about that part too hard. I still think about that party sometimes, 25 years later. Not because it was the best night of my life or anything like that, but because of how quickly things can spiral out of control when you're young and stupid, and there's alcohol involved. It was the kind of night that makes you realize how thin the line is between having a good time and everything going to hell. This was back in '94, maybe '95. I was 22 and living in this crappy duplex with my buddy Mike near campus. We weren't students anymore. I dropped out junior year to work construction, but we still hung around the college crowd because we were young and the girls were pretty. Mike had decided to throw what he called a proper house party, which basically meant he bought a keg, told everyone he knew to come over, and hope for the best. The party started normal enough, people trickling in around 8, and the music was playing. I remember we had this mixtape that was heavy on Nirvana and Stone Temple Pilots. Everyone was in a good mood, drinking beer from those red Solo cups that somehow became mandatory for every party in the 90s. There were maybe 30 people there at the peak, which felt like a lot in our tiny living room. I was talking to this girl, Sarah, from my old job, when I noticed the front door open and this guy walked in. I didn't recognize him, but that wasn't unusual. Mike knew people I didn't, and those people knew other people. What caught my attention was how he walked. He wasn't just walking into a party. He was scanning the room like he was looking for someone specific, and not in a good way. He was probably mid-20s, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. Nothing unusual for the time. But his face was flushed, and even from across the room I could tell he was drunk. Not party drunk, but angry drunk. There's a difference, and you learn how to spot it when you've been to enough parties. The first sign of trouble came about 10 minutes after he arrived. I heard voices getting louder near the kitchen. That particular tone that means someone's about to start something. By the time I made it over there, the guy was getting in the face of some kid named Tommy, jabbing his finger at his chest and saying something about, "You know what you did." Tommy looked genuinely confused, which only seemed to make the guy angrier. A couple of us stepped in with that universal, "Hey man, let's cool it down," approach that usually works at parties. Mike appeared from somewhere and started talking to the guy, trying to figure out what was going on. The guy kept saying he was looking for that piece of shit Jason, and how Jason needed to answer for what he did. There was a Jason at the party, Jason Martinez, this quiet guy who worked at the record store downtown, but from what that angry guy was describing, some drama involving his girlfriend, it was pretty clear he had the wrong Jason. We tried explaining this, but he was too drunk and worked up to listen to reason. Eventually, we convinced him to leave. It took some doing, and Mike had to get a little firm about it, but the guy stumbled out the front door muttering about how this wasn't over. We all kind of laughed it off. Every party has that one drunk idiot, it seems. But about an hour later, just as the party was getting back to its normal rhythm, the front door slammed open again. It was the same guy, but now he was past the angry drunk stage and moving into something uglier. This time he didn't bother with conversation. He started pushing people, demanding to know where Jason was. This led to the first real altercation, when he shoved Sarah hard enough that she stumbled backward into the wall. My friend Dave had had enough. Dave wasn't a big guy, but he'd wrestled in high school and didn't back down from anyone. They got into it right there in the living room. It was mostly awkward grappling and a few wild swings that missed more than they hit. A bunch of us broke it up pretty quickly, and this time when we told the guy to leave, there wasn't any negotiating. He left, but he was shouting threats the whole way down the driveway. We probably should have called the cops then, but you don't think that way when you're 22. We just wanted to get back to our fun. By midnight, things were winding down naturally. People were leaving in ones and twos, making plans for late night food or just heading home. Maybe 15 of us were left, mostly sitting around talking and finishing off the beer. The music was lower. The energy was mellow. I was actually having a good conversation with Jason about music. Turned out we both loved this band Jawbox that nobody else seemed to know about. That's when he came back the third time. I heard the front door, but I didn't think much of it until I heard him talking. Now I could make out exactly what he was saying, and it all started to make sense in the worst way possible. He was going on about how his girlfriend Michelle had been cheating on him with that bastard Jason, and how Jason thought he could just hide from the consequences. The problem was, he was staring right at Jason Martinez when he said it, and Jason Martinez had never met this guy's girlfriend in his life. I'm almost positive Jason was still a virgin even. He wasn't very good with the ladies. "Dude, I keep telling you, I don't know what you're talking about," Jason said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. This had been going on for hours now, and he was getting tired of being accused of something he didn't do. But the drunk guy wasn't hearing it. "Don't lie to me, Jason. Michelle told me everything. She told me about the apartment, about what you two did." That's when Jason said something that should have cleared everything up. "Man, I don't even know a Michelle, and I live with my parents. I don't have an apartment." For a second, I thought maybe that would get through to him, but instead of backing down, the guy just got more aggressive. "Stop lying," he screamed, and then he reached behind his back. The gun came out fast. It was a revolver, looked like a .38, though I'm no expert. All I knew was that suddenly everyone in that room was completely sober and completely terrified. "I'm done playing games," he said, pointing the gun in Jason's general direction, but waving it around enough that it felt like any of us could catch a bullet. What happened next probably took less than 30 seconds. Dave, who'd tangled with this guy earlier, was standing to the left. Mike was near the kitchen doorway. There were two other guys whose names I can't even remember now, but they were close enough to matter. I don't know who moved first, but suddenly all four of them were on him. It wasn't coordinated or planned, just four guys who realized that someone had to do something before people started dying. The gun went off once during the struggle, putting a hole in Mike's ceiling that I'm pretty sure never got fixed. But they got it away from him and pinned him to the floor. "Call the cops," Mike shouted, though someone already was. In those days, that meant using the landline in the kitchen, and I remember the surreal image of someone calmly dialing 911, while 4 guys wrestled with an armed drunk in the living room. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later, which was surprising. They took the guy into custody. He had pretty much given up the fight once he lost the gun. And then they spent another hour taking statements from everyone who was still there. That's when the whole story came out. The guy's name was Derek something, and yes, his girlfriend had cheated on him with a Jason. But it was Jason Crawford who lived in an apartment complex 2 blocks over. But the names of the complexes were similar. Derek had gotten drunk, decided to confront Jason, and somehow ended up at our place looking for any Jason he could find. The cop said Jason Martinez actually looked nothing like Jason Crawford, except for being roughly the same age and having brown hair. But Derek was too drunk and too angry to notice or care about the difference. In his mind, any Jason would do. Nobody got seriously hurt, which still amazes me when I think about it. Derek got charged with a bunch of things: assault, brandishing a firearm, discharging a firearm, and drunken disorderly. I heard later that he did some jail time and had to go to anger management classes. Jason Martinez moved away not long after that, though I don't think it was related to that party. Just one of those things that happen when you're in your 20s and life keeps moving. The thing that sticks with me the most isn't the gun or the fight, or even how scared I was. It's how random it all was. Derek wasn't some criminal mastermind or psychopath. He was just a drunk guy who'd been cheated on and made a series of increasingly bad decisions. Under different circumstances, he probably would have just been another face at the party. But that's what I learned that night. Sometimes the difference between a good story and a tragedy is just luck, and a few people willing to do the right thing when it matters. Mike never threw another party at that house, and I don't blame him. Some lessons you only need to learn once. I've been to a lot of house parties, and most of them blur together. Music too loud for the space, drinks poured into red cups, people dancing in the living room like it's a club, even though it's just some guy's rental. That night in 2015 was no different. It was one of those easy nights where you float from group to group, saying hi, laughing, taking selfies with friends you only half know. For the most part, it was fun. I remember feeling light, happy, the kind of buzz where everything's just a little brighter. Except for him. He showed up early in the night, maybe an hour after I got there. I don't remember what he said at first, something harmless, some generic line about the music or how packed the kitchen was. I was friendly because that's what you do. You smile, you give polite answers, you don't want to be rude. But he ended up stuck to me. Every time I drifted to another circle, he'd drift too. Not in an obvious cartoon way, just enough to feel like a shadow. If I laughed with a group on the porch, he was there leaning on the rail. If I stepped into the kitchen for another drink, he appeared near the fridge. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Then he brushed too close, his hand lingering near mine when I wasn't offering it. Later, when the crowd got looser and people weren't paying attention, he grabbed my ass like it was nothing. That's when I knew it wasn't my imagination. I found my friend, the one I'd come with. She was there with her boyfriend, and I pulled them aside. I didn't have to explain much. The look on my face did most of the work. I just said, "That guy," and nodded. Her boyfriend didn't hesitate. He walked up to the creep and told him to leave. The guy tried to play it off, insisting he wasn't going anywhere, some BS that he had every right to stay. But her boyfriend didn't ask twice. He put hands on him and pushed him out the front door. It wasn't even a fight, just force, a clear boundary. The door shut and the guy was gone, or so I thought. The rest of the night went back to normal. People danced, spilled drinks, and laughed too loud. The creepy guy faded into the background, and after a couple more hours, people started heading home. My friend and her boyfriend left before me. They offered me a ride, but I said I was fine. My place was only 2 blocks away, a 10-minute walk tops. The air was cool, and I remember being glad for it, because the house had been humid with all the bodies packed inside. I kicked at the sidewalk cracks as I walked, half distracted with my phone. Not even halfway down the first block, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back. It was just a lone guy keeping pace a ways back. I figured he was another party guest. People walk the same way sometimes, especially when everyone's leaving the same house, so I didn't think much of it. But then I heard running, quick steps slapping the pavement, closing in fast. I spun around, and that's when I saw him under the streetlight. It was the guy from the party, the one who wasn't supposed to still be around. It jolted through me like ice water. My buzz snapped away in an instant. I turned and ran. My house was close, but not close enough. I knew I wouldn't have time to fumble keys into the lock before he was on me. So I aimed 2 houses down, where I knew someone else lived. A man I'd talked to a few times, a neighbor with a reputation for being a little off. But he was more or less safe. Safe enough that when I needed a place to run, I picked his door. I was already banging on it when he caught up to me. His hands clamped around my arm, yanking me back hard enough that I stumbled. Then both arms went around my waist, trying to drag me away from the porch. I screamed. I screamed so loud I felt my throat tear. The house stayed dark for a second, and panic hit hard. I thought no one was home, that I'd picked wrong. But then a light flicked on upstairs, a window creaked open, and someone's face appeared, looking down at us. That made me scream even louder. The guy tried to pull me toward the street, but the front door opened. It was my neighbor, the combat vet, the one people sometimes talked about. Said he was a little unhinged and quick to anger. But in that moment, he was the best sight I'd ever seen. He stepped out with a gun in his hand, aimed low but steady. The creep froze. He let go of me, hands twitching like he didn't know what to do. Then he bolted. The vet didn't just let him run. He chased him into the street, shouting, catching him within seconds. I saw them struggle under the glow of the streetlight. Saw the vet swing his pistol into the guy's face, a sharp crack that echoed down the block. The creep stumbled, tried to fight back, then broke free and sprinted into the night. The vet didn't follow far. He came back, still gripping the gun, eyes wide and burning. He pulled me inside his house, locked the door, and handed me water with hands that shook, just enough to notice. The cops came soon after. The vet had called them and told them everything. They found the guy a few streets over, out of breath and with a black eye swelling fast. It was enough to tie him to what happened. They charged him with attempted kidnapping. I testified later. I told them what I remembered, that he'd been at the party, that no one seemed to know him, that he'd been kicked out but hung around anyway. I never saw him again. Last I heard, he was doing time, and maybe he still is. I still go to parties every once in a while, though not like I used to. I don't walk home alone anymore, not even 2 blocks, because now I know, when someone's decided you're the target, 2 blocks can feel like 2 miles, and sometimes you don't get a second chance to pick the right door. You know how some people have those wild college stories they love to tell at dinner parties? The ones where everyone did something crazy and it became this legendary night that bonded them forever. Well, I have one story like that, but it's not the kind I enjoy telling. It's the story of why I spent the rest of college staying in on Saturday nights with a good book and a cup of tea. This was spring of 1985, my sophomore year at State. I was majoring in English Lit and spent most of my free time in the library or in my dorm reading. My roommate, Cheryl, was the opposite. She knew everyone, went to every party, and was constantly trying to drag me along to expand my social horizons, as she put it. Usually I managed to decline politely, but this particular weekend she was relentless. "Come on, Linda, you can't spend another Saturday night reading Jane Austen," she said, pulling clothes out of her closet. "Brad's gonna be at this party, and you know you've been dying to talk to him all semester." Brad was this guy from my Victorian literature class, who I developed what I now realize was a pretty serious crush on. He was smart and funny, and had this way of making even the most boring discussion about Dickens feel pretty interesting. I'd been working up the courage to actually have a real conversation with him for months, but somehow never managed it. The party was at some rich kid's house off campus. I can't remember his name now, but his parents were loaded, something in real estate or construction, and they'd bought him this enormous house that was basically party central for the more affluent crowd. Not my usual scene at all, but Cheryl insisted it would be good for me to get out of my comfort zone. I should have trusted my instincts and stayed home. The house was already packed when we got there around 9. Music was blasting, Duran Duran I think, or it could have been Wham. And there were people everywhere. The living room reeked of cigarettes, and something sweet that I now know was marijuana, though I was pretty naive about drugs back then. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, and I immediately felt like the awkward outsider I was. Cheryl disappeared within about 10 minutes, presumably to find whatever guy she was interested in that week. I stood in the corner nursing a beer I didn't really want, watching people dance and laugh, and wondering why I'd let myself get talked into this. The whole scene felt foreign to me. All that confidence and casual intimacy that seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. I was actually plotting my escape route when I spotted Brad near the kitchen, talking to a group of people about something that looked serious and intellectual. This was my chance. I took a deep breath, finished what was left of my beer for courage, and made my way over. To my surprise, the conversation was actually interesting. They were debating whether Reagan's policies were helping or hurting the middle class, and Brad was making some really thoughtful points. I found myself relaxing for the first time all night, even contributing a few comments that seemed to land well. Maybe this party thing wasn't so terrible after all. I'd been talking with them for maybe 45 minutes when we heard the first scream. It came from somewhere toward the back of the house, followed by more shouting and the sound of people running. I thought maybe it was just typical party drama, someone getting too drunk, or a couple having a fight. But then more people started moving toward the back, and the mood in the room shifted from party happy to genuinely concerned. "What's going on back there?" Brad asked. And before I knew it, we were all moving in that direction, carried along by the crowd of curious partygoers. The house had this long hallway that led to what I assumed were bedrooms, and everyone was pressing forward to see what was happening. I'm not tall, 5'3" on a good day, so I couldn't see much over the heads in front of me, but I could hear a man's voice, loud and agitated, saying things that didn't make much sense. The crowd pushed forward, and I got swept along whether I wanted to or not. As we moved down the hallway, I caught a glimpse through an open bedroom door. There was a mirror on the bed, one of those big vanity mirrors, and it was covered with lines of white powder. Even in my naivety, I knew what that was. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just beer and pot. There were serious drugs at this party. When I finally got close enough to see what was happening, I wished I hadn't. There was a couple at the end of the hallway, near what looked like a back door. The woman was pressed against the wall, crying while her boyfriend, if that's what he was, stood in front of her waving a knife around. Not a kitchen knife, but something bigger, more like a hunting knife. He was clearly out of his mind on something, probably what was on that mirror. "I know what you're doing," he shouted at her, his voice high and paranoid. "You think I don't know, but I know. You're wearing a wire, aren't you? They sent you to get me." The girl kept shaking her head, trying to calm him down, but he wasn't hearing any of it. "They're not taking me back to jail," he kept saying. "I won't go back there. I won't." Everyone in the hallway had gone dead silent, watching this unfold. I remember thinking how surreal it was. Here we were, a bunch of college kids at what was supposed to be a fun party, and suddenly we're witnessing what felt like a complete psychological breakdown. That's when the host stepped forward. I have to give him credit for having more guts than the rest of us. He approached the guy slowly, hands visible, speaking in this calm, reasonable voice. "You're right, man," he said. "You're absolutely right. We need to get out of here before they come for us. Why don't you and your girlfriend pack up your stuff and head out? Get somewhere safe." For a moment, I thought it was going to work. The guy with the knife seemed to consider this, nodding like it made perfect sense. He lowered the knife slightly and started talking about where they could go, how they needed to disappear for a while. But then, just as it seemed like the situation might resolve peacefully, this other guy came up from behind him. I don't know where he came from. Maybe he'd circled around through another room. But suddenly he was there with what looked like a metal pipe, and he brought it down hard on the back of the knife guy's head. The sound it made was horrible. Not like in the movies, just this dull, wet thunk that made my stomach turn. The guy with the knife dropped like a stone, and the knife went skittering across the floor. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the host and the guy with the pipe grabbed the unconscious man under his arms and started dragging him toward the back door. The girlfriend was hysterical by this point, but she followed them outside. The whole crowd stood there for maybe another minute, processing what had just happened. Then, incredibly, people started drifting back to the front of the house like nothing had occurred. Someone turned the music back up. Conversations resumed. It was like the whole thing had been some kind of intermission. I couldn't believe it. I just stood in that hallway, staring at the spot where a man had just been knocked unconscious with a pipe, and everyone else was going back to their drinks and their dancing. Brad touched my arm. "You okay?" he asked, and I could see he was shaken too. I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. "I think I need some air." We went outside, and that's when I saw the aftermath. The girlfriend had apparently called a cab, and she was helping load the still groggy knife guy into the back seat. He was conscious but clearly confused, and she was talking to him in this soothing voice, like you'd use with a frightened child. "Come on, baby, we're going back home now," I heard her say as the cab pulled away. I found Cheryl inside and told her I wanted to leave. She protested at first. The night was still young, and she hadn't had a chance to talk to her guy yet. But something in my face must have convinced her I was serious. Before we left, I ended up giving Brad my number, and Cheryl gave hers to him as well, to pass along to the guy she had been wanting to talk to. As we drove back to campus, all I could think about was that knife, and the sound the pipe made, and how quickly everyone had gone back to partying like nothing had happened. It was all so surreal and alien to me. Brad did call me the next week, and we went out for coffee a few times. He was everything I thought he was. Smart, funny, kind. But when he invited me to another party a few weeks later, I politely declined. When he asked why, I couldn't really explain it without sounding like a complete prude. The truth was, that night had shown me something about myself that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't built for that kind of chaos and unpredictability. I liked my quiet Saturday nights, my books, my usual routines. I liked knowing that when I went to sleep, the worst thing that might happen was a boring dream about an upcoming exam. I never found out what happened to the knife guy or his girlfriend. I heard rumors that he'd been arrested a few weeks later for something unrelated, that she'd broken up with him, that the whole thing had been over some drug debt. But I never knew for sure, and honestly, I didn't want to know. The rest of my college years were exactly what you'd expect: quiet, studious, and safe. I graduated with honors, got a job at a publishing house, and eventually married a very nice, very stable man I met at a book club. We've been married 26 years, and the wildest parties we attend are faculty dinners, where the biggest controversy is usually a heated debate about the latest Pulitzer Prize winner. And you know what? I'm perfectly happy with that. Some people are built for adventure and chaos and dramatic stories. I learned that night that I'm built for peace, quiet, and the kind of excitement you find between the pages of a good book. It took a man with a knife and a metal pipe to teach me that lesson, but it's one I've never forgotten. You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radeon production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.